morning. It's great to be here in beautiful Monaco. It's actually my second trip to Monaco. I was able to come here last year in May for the F1 Grand Prix races, and it was awesome. Not as exciting of a topic as cybersecurity, not as dangerous, not as thrilling, but it was awesome too. I expect that Lazi says that this time next year, we'll draw a similar crowd and level of enthusiasm from around the world. In all seriousness, it's great to see so many cybersecurity professionals, leaders, and decision makers here in the room. And I appreciate the ability to speak with you this morning. As you all know, we have our work cut out for us. We're facing tremendous challenges. And before we rush in and start talking about what those solutions are and how we're going to save our organizations and change the world, I wanted to take a step back and see if we're talking about the same problem, if we're seeing the problem accurately and consistently. So today I want to start off by talking about perspective. We process data every single second. We subconsciously filter and categorize all of this information based on what's important to us, based on our own perspectives. Artists often notice the minute details of a city block, the nuanced variations in color in the pavement, and the light and boldness of the graffiti. Engineers prioritize data based on the blueprints they see in their mind, the structural integrity of the buildings and its infrastructure, and how that infrastructure will perform. And futurists, they see the potential for that city block 10, 20, 30 years into the future. Each of us is biased based on our own perspectives and our own unique set of experiences. Well, as security professionals, we're taught to be suspicious of new technologies, and rightfully so. But we also know that technology today serves as the greatest leverage point for every organization that we work in. The efficiency that it drives has the ability to completely transform our organizations, how we deal with our customers, and radically change markets. Technology is foundational to defense, intelligence, and civil service. And, as we know, technology is not static. It's ever-changing, constantly shifting and evolving. And organizations need to embrace this new reality. They need to embrace these new technologies and transform themselves or become completely obsolete. Now, hopefully, all of our data points and analysis lead all of us to that same conclusion. So while we might be afraid of new technologies and the risks they bring, we also realize we need to embrace them to be competitive. So let's talk about our perspectives on the path forward. What actions do we need to take? Well, let me start off with an example on how powerful perspective can be and how it can drive a change in your actions and the outcomes that result. Has anybody in the room ever heard of Dick Fosbury? All right, we've got 4 or 5 folks, 6 folks that know Dick Fosbury. Most of you don't. I'm not surprised. I didn't either once upon a time. I want to talk to you about Dick Fosbury. You see, with the Olympics just behind us, I thought that Dick would serve as a great example of changing perspective and actions, and ultimately achieving different outcomes. You see, in the 1960s, Dick Fosbury was a high jumper in the United States. And Dick was a terrible high jumper. I mean, he really stunk. Never achieved spectacular results. He even claimed that he was the worst high jumper in his entire club. Not very impressive. But Dick was open-minded and willing to look at things from a different perspective and change his actions. You see, until the 1960s, high jumpers used to land in these sawdust pits. And so the techniques that they used to leap over the bar were limited to techniques which would have you landing on your feet. So they were adopting things called the Western roll. And they were only able to achieve a certain height. And then in the 1960s, when Dick Fosbury was a teenager, they started inventing and rolling out these cushy mats for you to land on. And as a result, Dick realized you don't have to land on your feet. While most of the other high jumpers continued doing their Western rolls, Dick started looking at things from a different perspective. And if these mats were soft enough to not have to land on your feet, why not change how you jump? So Dick changed how he jumped. And he pioneered a new technique. He threw himself over the bar, head and shoulders first, and ended up landing on his back. And to this day, that jumping technique, which we're all familiar with, it looks awkward, but that jumping technique is known as the Fosbury flop. And that allowed his center of gravity to be distributed, and it gave him a longer time period to clear the bar. Well, with this awkward technique, Dick caught the world's attention in the 1968 Olympics when he brought home the gold medal. And he redefined the technique that's used by every single high jumper in the sport. A new piece of technology, the cushy mats. It gave all athletes, all high jumpers, the opportunity to think differently. But only Dick brought that new perspective to the table. And Dick was the first one to change his actions as a result of this new perspective. Dick Fosbury led the way. And that serves as a great example of what we need to do in our industry, right? Dick had that different perspective, he honed his style, he jumped differently, and he achieved different results. So, to change our thinking, let's start with some understanding of common facts that we should all share. Gartner estimates that this year, information security budgets and spending will total about $75 billion. $75 billion. They also estimate that in 2014, just 2 years ago, 90% of that budget was spent on protective technologies that we're all familiar with. And about 10% was spent on rapid detection and response. Gartner also projects that by the year 2020, that number is going to go through a massive shift. By 2020, only 40% of information security budgets are going to go toward protection, and 60% will be spent on rapid detection and response. The world is shifting. It's changing. Our industry is changing. And RSA's own research also reflects that. 70% of organizations in EMEA self-reported that they had been compromised in the last 12 months. 70%. And I would suggest that many of those which didn't report a compromise in the last 12 months simply weren't capable of detecting their breaches. Security incidents are growing at 66% year over year. And only 24% of respondents said that they were satisfied with their ability to detect and respond to today's threats. This is the definition of insanity, right? Repeating our same activity, our same strategy for defense, and expecting different results to occur. To change our outcomes, we have to change our perspective and our actions. Why are these breaches occurring? Well, as all of us know, we're facing a very sophisticated adversary, ones that are focused on compromising our environments. They're incredibly creative, patient, and persistent. They're unpredictable, and they bring a wide range of tools and techniques into their activities. And they orchestrate their attacks and tools until they are successful. We're dealing with human ingenuity, which, as you know, can be an incredibly powerful thing. And because the protections that we've put in place are improving and getting better, our adversaries are changing. They are thinking differently. They're evolving at blazing speeds. They aren't beating us because they're better at technology. They're working with the same mats that we are. They're beating us because they've changed their perspective. Their perspective is focused on evolution. Let me be clear. Even with these great improvements in security technologies, no next-generation firewall, no anti-malware sandbox, no host armament is going to keep your environment safe. That requires heavy lifting. We have to think differently. Why aren't we doing it? Maybe it's because the choices we face are confusing. Maybe it's because choosing to think differently and doing something different than you've done in the past takes a lot of strength. Takes a lot of courage. Let me throw another interesting number out at you. 80%. In multiple separate research studies, between 75% and 85% of CISOs are reevaluating their security strategies over the next 12 to 18 months. 80%. Why? Why are your peers thinking differently? It's because, as you know, cybersecurity is evolving. The technologies evolve, but it's also evolving as an industry. These conversations aren't limited to technologists anymore. These conversations are going straight to the CEO, to the board of directors. They're asking different questions. Certainly, they want to know where the money's being spent. This is a constant in business. But they also want to know what the impact is to their business. They realize that technology risk today is business risk. And this is true in every single industry. It's true in governments and in the private sector. Security is an inflection point. If we don't develop better strategies to detect and respond to our adversaries, we're facing tremendous losses, just like all those other high jumpers in the 1968 Olympics. So we've got to change this game. We've got to change our perspective. We've got to act differently, just like Dick Fosbury did. We need to think beyond perimeters, beyond signatures, beyond logging and SIM platforms that we've relied on for so long. We need to bring a unified approach to security that's radically different. It's different from a technology perspective, but it's also aligned with our business objectives. And we can't get that from traditional systems because they were designed in a different environment than we operate today. Everybody in the room has a different IT operating environment and business environment than they were operating in a few years ago. Our user populations have embraced cloud and mobile technologies, our business applications and data, they're still in the enterprise, but they're out in the cloud as well. We have fewer and limited control of the compute platforms and the interchange with our customers and business partners. And we've got to do this, and we have to embrace these modern platforms in a much faster way. Let me tell you about another security professional, my good friend Roland Cloutier, who's the CISO of ADP. He's been there for about 4 years. Roland came in and was asked to rethink how ADP does security. I'm sure many of you in the room are familiar with ADP. For those of you that aren't, ADP is a massive, massive infrastructure. It's one of the largest payroll and management firms in the world. And they're at the forefront of the threat and a lot of the same challenges that are facing you. Well, early on, we had many conversations with Roland. And his objective was to put in a security strategy that aligned with ADP's business objectives. It was very different than a very technology-focused security strategy that ADP had relied on previously. Well, Roland started off trying to understand what's missing in the environment, what was happening in his environment, and what he and ADP needed to do in order to accomplish their mission. Well, he had a different environment than his predecessors had been used to and that they had designed their security for. ADP had made many acquisitions over the years. Different levels of security, different security products, different security platforms. The user population needed different levels of access. They were coming in from controlled devices and non-managed devices, privately owned devices. ADP had a lot of legacy platforms and infrastructure, and a lot of modern compute platforms and infrastructure. And they were rushing to embrace cloud capabilities as well. So Roland had to very rapidly evolve his security program on the fly, as many of you have to do. With the loss of what his predecessor believed was a perimeter-based security model, Roland moved forward understanding the business and embracing new technology, because that's what ADP needed to do to remain competitive. In this perimeterless world, he first realized that there are fewer anchor points for security. He needed to know who's in his environment, to identify the users, to be able to strongly authenticate themselves into his environment or into cloud-based applications, to be able to use corporate-provided compute platforms or personally owned devices, to be able to access in a convenient way what they needed access to get their jobs done, but also limited beyond that. So this new paradigm started taking hold at ADP, and it started with the anchor point of identity assurance, and then morphed and evolved into a better understanding of what he characterized as advanced security operations, knowing exactly what was happening in his environment. I know who the users are, I know what they have access to and they don't have access to. I need to know what systems are communicating with which, the method of that communication, the types of data going back and forth. Those are my best options for detecting when compromises occur, when things are behaving in an anomalous fashion, and tying that stronger user and behavior activity to security operations. Historically, those have been two separate islands. One group does identity management, access, provisioning, and authentication. One group does security monitoring. Well, as we see the advanced threat actors behaving, they compromise systems. They have other techniques. They abuse identities. They spearfish. They compromise credentials. And they use those compromised credentials to walk through the environment, to move laterally, and gain access to valuable information and achieve their objectives. The third pillar of Roland's strategy was to tie his security operations and his identity assurance programs to what matters to the business. It's a huge environment, operating all over the globe. Can't protect everything, can't protect it equally at all times and at all cost. And as much budget as Roland wants to command, he also realizes that ADP is in a very competitive business. And the risk management function is incredibly important. And that can't be done with standard technologies. So Roland and the industry really had to evolve. And these are many of the same challenges you face. Who are your users? What compute platforms are they coming in from? What do they have access to? How are you protecting that infrastructure? How do you understand when systems are behaving differently? And especially as our environment changes from traditional enterprise compute to cloud-based. And probably very few of you have made that transition, and only a few of your organizations, if any, are operating in this elegant cloud-only environment. No, our world is quite messy. That's the challenge you face. Messy from a user and identity assurance perspective, but also messy in terms of understanding what's happening in your environment. But that's the insight that we need in order to identify anomalous behavior, in order to tie it to our business objectives and reduce business risk. But these new technologies and solutions, this new level of visibility, also introduces new capabilities, new analytic methods. It allows us to view network anomalies, application anomalies, user behavior anomalies more rapidly and identify compromises and abuses of activity. And most importantly, it increases our speed to insight, which is critical for our success and for the success of our businesses. So this new perspective, this is the path forward. This is what we've started calling business-driven security. And the net is that we have to start embracing this new generation of security capability. RSA and a lot of the innovative vendors that you see out at the expo over the next few days, these are the leading solutions that we're working on. We need to move the industry forward with this better, more complete perspective. Gone are the days where point products working on an individual sliver of our security challenges can deliver value. They can't. Our adversaries don't operate myopically anymore. Right? Our adversaries bring an orchestrated attack campaign with lots of tools to the table. Defending one sliver of the environment from a point solution is obsolete. It adds little value. It aligns with legacy concepts in security, like antivirus technologies. The world's evolving faster. Well, with the right visibility and the right analytic tools, we can identify activities in our environment faster. We can respond more rapidly. RSA does this in our own security analytic and our NetWitness platforms. We're achieving great results. We're finding compromises in customer systems. But let me be clear. There are no magic solutions out there, no matter what any vendor might tell you. Machine learning, big data, behavioral analytics, these are awesome concepts, and our industry is starting to apply them to find new methods of identifying compromises. They can be applied to further our cause, make us more efficient, right? But our threats and our threat strategies aren't going to be solved by any one platform or solution, any more than they were solved by sandboxing solutions 3 and 4 years ago. Tools alone aren't going to win in this arms race. We need to employ the same level of ingenuity and outside-the-box thinking as our adversaries do. Cybersecurity tools, they're like carabiners, ropes, and ice axes. You know, the types of things we see out on the beach here at Monaco. Well, maybe not at Monaco, but if you're going to climb a glacier, those things are going to help you get to the top. They're absolutely critical, but they're not going to do it alone, right? You can use them to your advantage, but you have to start with the vision and the courage to take on what is seemingly an impossible task. Let me share a personal story. My daughter's favorite word when she was 5 years old was why. She kept asking, why? And as a parent, that drives you crazy. But don't lose that sense of curiosity, that desire to hunt down an answer, the desire to chase things down to ground truth, the openness to gain a different perspective about your environment. Be like an annoying 5-year-old. Be relentless. Wear your adversaries down by continually challenging your teams, asking why. And as you build your cybersecurity strategies, acquire and analyze all sorts of new data points available to you. Make connections. Paint a full picture of what's happening in the environment. See the entire landscape. And then look for outliers and anomalies, things that conflict with your view of the environment. Figure out your organization's point of view. Determine how those data points build a perspective on a city block. And so once you've done that, then start thinking like Dick Fosbury. Ask yourself, how can I use this new map to my advantage? And once you answer that question, ask it again and again and again. Never settle. Don't be afraid to make shifts and changes in your views of the world and change your perspective. Be more like Dick Fosbury and all those that have come after him. Stop relying on technologies alone, hoping that they'll prevent the attack, the compromise, and that they'll keep you safe. Look at things from a different perspective. You will be compromised. How do you thrive in that environment? How do you help your organization create a program that can link the identification of these breaches and threats and actors to what matters most to your enterprise and its mission? Form that security strategy that can be driven by business needs and gain that different perspective. That's the path forward for our industry. Business-driven security. So I think we have a few minutes now, and I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions if you have any. And since I don't speak French, I'm going to get a translation.
Hi. Do you think that the next generation will be only based on Hadoop to gain agility on the investigation and also on the predictive ways that we have to detect things now?
Will be based on Hadoop?
Yeah.
I don't think Hadoop is the answer for everything at all times. Brilliant marketing, and I think a new approach to large data sets. And there are certain instances where unstructured data can add tremendous value and can be leveraged in ways that we haven't been able to leverage it before. So I think there will be a role for Hadoop to play in security organizations and in different analytic techniques. But certain methods will lend themselves to better discovery and analysis in platforms like Hadoop. And as we also realize with many organizations that have deployed Hadoop, Hadoop is very limited in a very inefficient way to do very efficient analysis of structured data sets and things of that nature. So, I think it's going to be a careful balance, but there's the opportunity to leverage Hadoop as a backend or other backend data sets, large data sets, and apply different analytic methods. And that's where a lot of the sort of pioneering research in security is happening in applying different analytic methods to the data, to the information that's available to us, instead of what are my intrusion detection systems telling me, because that's kind of like relying on antivirus to avoid malware. It's a nice thought.
Hi, Amit. Thank you very much for this great reference. I have a question. If you don't have Dick Fosbury in your team, from your point of view, what do you keep inside and create your own Fosbury, and what you can give to your partner?
Yeah. If you don't have a Dick Fosbury on your team, which many organizations don't, I think that there's a requirement for that innovative type of thinking. I think you can't really, be in security without having some of that DNA in your organization. So I always recommend that people go out and follow the queen bee theory. You go out and you find somebody with the passion to pursue this, and they don't have to have, decades of expertise. The one thing that we know in technology is sometimes people that didn't grow up in security or in the traditional track are able to think outside the box more rapidly than those of us who have been in the field for many, many years and have already been trained to think a certain way. So I think going out and finding somebody with a personal passion and intellectual curiosity that just, they don't leave at 5 o'clock in the afternoon because they love asking why and chasing, the bits and the bytes to understand what's really happening in the environment. And what I have found is that if you can, grab somebody and foster their curiosity and create an environment where they're encouraged, that they'll start infecting others in the organization and being able to recruit others in the organization that want to pursue that type of mindset. And their knowledge starts spilling over and their passion starts spilling over. So I think that, finding somebody, and I don't know if it's, like a Dick Fosbury that just thinks radically differently, but finding somebody with that intellectual curiosity is critical to security success. And as you know, today security is a balancing act for the CISO, right? Your job is different than it was for your predecessors or than it was 5 years ago, because you need to have a team that can exercise that technical expertise, but you as the CISO need to balance that and to be able to speak about the business differently than the CISOs in years past. Yours is now a business role. You have to understand the team that you work with and be able to translate that into what matters to the organization. But that curiosity, I think, is critical for security programs today.
Hi. It's a follow-up question. You just mentioned that the enemy is very creative, and it has always been. Now that they're organized as real businesses themselves, what do you consider the company's best asset to fight this creativity and to keep up the pace of creativity?
Yeah, unfortunately, having spent time working in government once upon a time, the answer is not government. Government has a role to play, and I think law enforcement, developing cooperative relationships and international, greater efficiency at pursuing international crime is imperative for the greater deterrence of this type of activity. But it's not happening in scale anytime soon. So it's really up to us to defend and protect our organizations. And I think step one is apply the best protections you can apply. And there are a lot of innovation happening. You know, I say next generation firewall aren't going to keep you safe. Next generation firewall is miles ahead of what firewall technology was a few years ago. So make sure that you're keeping pace with the innovation happening in prevention and protection. But I think the big wake up for our industry is realizing even when I've done that, because of this creative adversary, compromise will still occur. And when you see reports that claim that it's 217 days for the average time of detection of a successful breach, 217 days, you know, shame on us as an industry if we've developed security programs which take 217 days on average to detect a compromise. You know, what we see, and we work all around the world with different industries, is that this is really where the CISO makes their money. There's a radical difference between those organizations that understand the threat environment and what they need to do to monitor differently and detect and respond in minutes, hours, or days, and those that are really focused on their compliance objectives and don't really pursue an understanding of the threat environment. And I think that today is the leverage point for CISOs, to migrate your security program from compliance, because that's what the business understands, to one that is business driven and understands the technology and business risk in the threat environment and what you need to do to better monitor, detect, respond, and be more agile in today's environment. And so I think that's a key point in where, you know, the CISO experience and leverage really comes from organizations. You have a very critical role to play. So I know we're almost out of time, but before I wrap up, I wanted to talk about that last point a little bit. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for about 25 years now, and it's very depressing. I've spent a majority of that time doing network monitoring and hardcore incident response work, and so helping organizations come to grips with an understanding that they've been compromised. And sometimes it's been that the compromise has been there for years. Helping them gain a new perspective on what the dirty, dark reality of our cyber world really looks like. And so I'm not only highly opinionated, but I have lots of scars from these experiences. But I think it's important to share, based on those experiences, share my perspective with you and to speak, you know, every time I can clearly to our industry. So before I wrap up, I wanted to just take maybe the last few minutes and you know, take a step back and thank you personally and remind you that the work that you do matters. It's incredibly important. It matters every single day to the entire world. It matters to our organizations, it matters to our customers, it matters to our partners. And the work that we do matters to our families. Right? In this modern world, right, this crazy image and all of these concepts of humanity's potential for the future, right? None of that is achievable in nano, in space technologies, in medicine, in transportation. All of this human enlightenment that's coming about over the next several decades, none of that can be achieved if we collectively aren't successful in cyber. So remember that what you do matters. When you go out onto the show, when you listen to other sessions, when you go out into the expo halls, and you start looking at some of the innovative things that are happening in our industry, ask yourself, okay, How does this new mat change my perspective? How does having access to this new mat enable me to think differently and to act differently and to achieve different outcomes for my organization? And I know many of you are working with management and other executives in the organizations that don't understand or appreciate the difference between regulatory compliance and delivering the security requirements of your organization. Don't get discouraged when you have to fight that battle over and over again. It's incredibly important. The work that you do and the work that we do together, it matters. Thank you.